The year is 480 before Christ. Off the rocky edge of Thera, the wind howls over black waves. The entire city is gathered, torches raised, breath held as a lone girl stands barefoot at the cliff's edge, wrapped in white linen, crowned in laurel. Below, the Aegean churns like something alive. A priest chants to Poseidon. The crowd repeats his words, and as the girl is led forward, wrists bound in crimson wool, one truth crashes over her like the waves below. This was never a festival. It was a burial dressed as celebration. Every spring, the people of Thera danced. They sang by the harbor, hung olive branches on doorposts, and poured libations over sun-warmed altars. To outsiders, it was a vision of joy, a festival for the sea god, a harmless island ritual. But there was one part of the festival no traveler ever saw. One ritual the elders never spoke of in the open. Every 7th year, under the first full moon of spring, the sea demanded purity, not the clean kind of purity that came from incense or oil. No, what the sea wanted was untouched flesh, unsullied blood, a virgin. The chosen offering was called the Nerida, named after the sea nymphs who once danced for Poseidon. Girls of noble and humble birth alike were made to wear white and stand in silence as the temple priests walked among them with the sacred laurel. It was said the wind would guide the wreath to rest upon the head of the one the god desired most. But everyone in Thera knew it was not the wind that made the choice. The laurel moved in the hands of the high priest, and the high priest moved by other things: family feuds, unpaid debts, hidden shame. When the laurel was cast this year, it floated unnaturally long in the air before landing upon a girl named Lysandra. She was 14, the daughter of a widowed fisherman who had failed to bring in a catch all winter. The priest declared it divine selection. The crowd, nervous and unsure, began to cheer, and Lysandra, lips trembling, bowed her head because she had no other choice. Her mother covered her face. Her brothers stared at the ground. Within hours, Lysandra was taken from her home and placed in the maiden's house, a white stone enclosure on the temple hill, where no man was allowed to speak and no girl was allowed to leave. She would spend 7 days there, preparing to meet the sea. During the day, the people celebrated with wine and painted vases. At night, they sang hymns to Poseidon and lit fires by the water's edge. No one spoke of the maiden. No one asked how she felt. To question the ritual was to question the gods, and no one in Thera was foolish enough to do that. So the days passed, and the girl waited, crowned in borrowed holiness, wrapped in borrowed silence, offered like fruit to the waves. They came for her at dawn. The temple guards wore white robes and blank expressions, as if the task before them required no feeling, no thought, only obedience. Lysandra's mother tried to place a pomegranate in her hands for protection, but it was slapped away. Superstition had no place once the gods had spoken. Her brothers stayed inside, eyes lowered. No one kissed her forehead. No one fought to stop it. She walked alone between the guards, her bare feet brushing the cold stone, the scent of sea salt and ash thick in the air. The maiden's house stood high on the cliffs, its marble face blind and solemn, as if it too had forgotten how to grieve. Inside, it was silent. No laughter, no prayers, only the soft echo of her breath as she was led to a chamber lined with ivory walls. 2 temple women approached without words, dressed in black veils that hid their faces. They stripped her gently, not with cruelty, but with a kind of clinical reverence. Her old clothes, her last pieces of self, were taken and burned. In their place, they wrapped her in a thin linen robe that left her shoulders bare. Her hair was combed until it hurt, then braided with olive leaves and soaked in oil. She was told not to speak. She was told not to cry. She was told she belonged to the sea now, not her family, not even herself. Each day followed the same rhythm. Before sunrise, she was bathed in cold water and rubbed with myrrh. At noon, she drank from a silver cup, an herbal brew said to quiet fear and memory. In the evenings, she was made to kneel before a statue of Poseidon carved from black stone, whispering words she barely understood. I am your offering. I am your vessel. I am your tide. The same chant, again and again, until the words felt like waves eroding what was left of her name. She was not allowed mirrors. She was not allowed windows. But through the small cracks in the stone, she sometimes caught the sound of laughter outside the songs of the festival. the cheers of the crowd, the careless joy of a city dancing while one of its daughters waited to die. On the 5th night, she whispered her mother's name. It felt like a sin. On the 6th, she whispered her own. It felt like blasphemy. No one came to visit, not even the priest. The temple women spoke only in nods and gestures. They lit candles. They changed her robes. They prepared her as if she were already dead. But Lysandra was still alive. Her heart beat like a drum behind her ribs. Her lungs ached for air that didn't taste like incense and stone. She was 14. She had never kissed anyone. She had never seen the open sea. But in 2 days, the sea would take her, and no one would call it murder. They would call it sacred. The morning of the 7th day arrived without sunlight. The sky was a dull gray, as if the heavens themselves had turned their faces from what was to come. Lysandra stood still as the temple women unbraided her hair, letting the oil-slicked strands fall like seaweed over her shoulders. Her body smelled of herbs and salt, but she no longer flinched at the chill of the water or the weight of the silence. She had not spoken in 6 days. Her voice had begun to feel like something foreign, something she used to own. Outside, drums began to beat. Slow at first, like the heartbeat of a sleeping animal. Then faster, louder, until the sound filled the chamber. It was the signal that the final procession had begun. A ritual not of choice, but of choreography. Lysandra was dressed in a new robe, white linen embroidered with gold thread, cinched with a crimson sash. Her wrists were bound again, this time more tightly. The cord cut into her skin. She did not complain. She had learned that pain, in this place, was sacred. The temple doors opened for the first time since she had arrived. A gust of sea wind hit her like a slap. The scent of brine and smoke filled her lungs. She blinked against the light, though the sky remained colorless. A line of priests awaited her outside, their faces hidden behind masks shaped like waves and sea creatures. Behind them, the people of Thera stretched out like a tide. Families, elders, children, all gathered in reverent stillness. No one called her name. No one reached for her hand. As she was led forward, the drums ceased. In their place rose the chant, a low hum of voices that spoke to gods and ancestors, to tides and storms, to a sea that had swallowed countless girls and never once answered back. She could feel the stares, not cruel, not kind, just empty, as if they had already stripped her soul and buried it in the salt. The procession climbed the cliffside path to the altar stone that jutted over the crashing waves. It was dark with centuries of sea spray, worn smooth by bare feet and tears. At its edge stood the high priest, arms outstretched, a dagger in one hand, a branch of laurel in the other. He began to speak not to her, but to Poseidon, of sacrifice, of purity, of duty. Lysandra's name was never said. She was not the girl, she was the vessel. As the priest lifted the branch, she looked out to the sea. It was churning now, violent and gray, as if it too had grown tired of pretending. And for a fleeting second, Lysandra wondered if she ran. Would the gods chase her, or would they simply choose another girl, bind her wrists, and call her blessed? The thought vanished as quickly as it came. The chant swelled, the priest raised his hand, and Lysandra stepped forward. The wind howled louder than the voices. Lysandra stood at the altar's edge, the sea raging beneath her, the sky a shroud of iron. The priest's chant dissolved into silence as he lowered the laurel branch and nodded once to the temple guards. They moved without hesitation. One took her by the arm, the other by the shoulder, and together they guided her forward softly, almost gently, as if pretending this was still sacred. But her bare feet scraped against the cold stone. Her knees trembled, her mouth opened, but no sound came. She had forgotten how to speak. Below, the cliffs dropped into frothing waves that beat the rock like fists. The crowd gathered above was silent now. Mothers held their children close. Fathers kept their eyes fixed on the sea. The elders muttered prayers into the folds of their cloaks, and the younger girls watched with wide eyes, wondering if their turn would come next spring, or the one after that. Lysandra saw none of it. She saw only the water. The gods stepped aside. The priest raised his arm one last time and shouted the ancient words, words that meant nothing and everything. She had been taught them as a child, had repeated them during games, never knowing they were funeral hymns in disguise. Her knees buckled, her feet slipped on the edge. She did not jump, she did not resist, she only swayed, like a reed caught in the wind, and then the sea reached up to claim her. She fell fast. The air vanished. The cold hit like stone. Salt filled her mouth, her nose, her lungs, her body twisted in the waves, limbs flailing against currents that felt like hands. The white robe bloomed around her like a flower, then tore in the current. The crimson cord unraveled from her wrists and drifted upward like a trail of blood. She kicked once, then again, but the sea did not care. Above, the people watched the splash. The priest declared the sacrifice accepted. Drums began again. The festival resumed, but the sea was not done. An hour passed. Then, too, the sky began to clear. Children ran through the streets with garlands in their hair. Wine spilled from clay cups. A fisherman walking along the beach found something tangled in the seaweed. Not a body, just the laurel crown, its leaves stained dark red. He picked it up and brought it to the temple. The priest said nothing. He only nodded and placed it on the altar. It was done. The city was saved. The sea would be calm again. And the girl's name was not spoken again, not in song, not in story, not even by her mother. Because in Thera, remembrance was dangerous. Forgetting was tradition. The tide returned the fish first. Silver-scaled and glinting like coins, they flooded the empty nets of Thera's fishermen by the dozens. Then came the calm, the waves softened, the storm ceased, and the sky cleared into a forgiving blue. The elders declared the omen fulfilled. Poseidon had accepted the gift. The sea was at peace. So the people rejoiced. The harvest resumed. The market swelled with trade, and Lysandra's name, like so many before her, dissolved from memory like salt in the wind. At the temple, the priests walked with pride. Their robes fluttered through the marble halls, as if lightened by divine approval. They burned incense and thanked the gods, their voices rich with triumph. Behind closed doors, they debated the timing of the next festival, whether the years between sacrifices should be fewer now that the sea had grown so greedy. No one questioned it. Why would they? The gods had spoken. The results were visible in every basket of fresh fish, in every dry night unmarred by thunder. The sacrifice had worked. Lysandra's mother stopped leaving the house. Her door remained shut, her face unseen. People whispered that she had accepted it, that she knew her daughter had served the gods well. But the truth lived behind a shuttered window, where her fingers touched an empty comb each morning, and her eyes stared at the sea until they burned. She did not speak of her daughter, not even to the gods. Grief was not allowed to interfere with order. At the school, the younger girls resumed their studies. They copied verses about loyalty and balance, about the duty of women to preserve harmony. None of them mentioned what they had seen at the cliff. None of them dared say Lysandra's name, though they had braided her hair only weeks before. Their silence was not cowardice, it was inheritance, a learned ritual passed down through the bones of every girl on the island. One day, they knew, the laurel would fall again. It would land on one of them, and when it did, the city would call it honor. Tourists came to Thera from across the sea, drawn by the stories of the beautiful spring festival. They admired the dances, the painted amphorae, the white-cloaked priests. They asked nothing of the altar on the cliff, nothing of the crimson threads tangled in the rocks below. The island glowed with piety and peace, and no one cared to look beneath the surface. Why would they? The sea was calm, the sky was kind, and so the offering became legend, and the legend became myth, and the myth made it easier to forget that once she was real. Spring returned, the winds shifted, the trees bloomed, and once again the people of Thera prepared for the Festival of Thalassios. New garlands were woven, new hymns were rehearsed, potters etched waves and dolphins into fresh vases, and children practiced the sacred dances in the sunlit courtyards. No one mentioned the previous year. No one spoke of the girl with dark hair and wide eyes who had stood on the cliff. Her name had vanished like a whisper swallowed by the sea. 7 years had not yet passed, but whispers swirled that Poseidon's hunger was growing. The fishermen claimed the tides were changing again, that the fish were swimming deeper, that strange shapes moved beneath the moonlit surface. One boat returned cracked in half, another never returned at all. The priests gathered in secret. They read old scrolls, reinterpreted omens, and in their silence, the truth emerged. Another offering would be needed, not in 7 years, but now. This time, the laurel crown was heavier. It floated less. It fell fast. The girl it landed on was barely 13, the daughter of a stone merchant. Her name was Ione. She had large, frightened eyes and a habit of singing to herself when she thought no one listened. When the crown touched her head, the city exhaled in relief. The storm would pass. The gods would be satisfied. Ione was taken to the maiden's house, just as Lysandra had been. She too was stripped and anointed, silenced and reshaped into something holy. She did not cry until the 3rd day. She did not speak at all after the 4th. Outside her stone cell, the festival roared louder than ever before. Wine flowed like water. Men cheered the return of divine favor, and mothers held their daughters a little tighter, praying the crown would never find them. The procession came again, the drums, the chant, the sea, wide and waiting, but no one called it death. They called it tradition. They called it worship. The ritual had become so polished, so rehearsed, that even horror had been made beautiful. And when Ione vanished beneath the waves, her red-bound wrists swallowed by the dark, no one screamed, no one ran. No one asked whether the gods had ever truly wanted this, or whether the sea had ever truly spoken at all. The laurel crown washed ashore 3 days later, another sign, another success. The island rejoiced. The sea, as always, said nothing. And thus the festival endured not as myth, not as memory, but as machinery. One girl offered, one tide calmed, 1 year silenced, again and again. Because in ancient Greece, not every ritual was born of devotion. Some were built on fear, and some were simply never stopped. If this story unsettled you, it should, because the past isn't just filled with myths, it's built on the bones of those we chose to forget. If you want more forgotten truths from the ancient world, rituals, laws, and lives erased from history, subscribe now. We uncover what textbooks won't, and we remember those the world tried to silence.